I think we can both agree that parenting might be one of the most, if not the most important reason why society is uh, in a falling state. And, well, so many problems we see around us are from individuals who were raised poorly. They had very, very bad parents that didn't teach them the right morals and the right behaviors to attribute when they grow older. And so this is a bit of a rhetorical question for both of us since we both kind of know the answer. But what do we see around us as evidence of this poor parenting?
Well, what we see around us is pretty much on every single day, human interactions. It could be also in the family, it could be on the streets, it could be just regular folks, we just meeting at work, but as well, outside of that sphere, look at the politicians, look at, the people in different countries and so on and so on. And I think the best way, to kind of summarize is the consequences, right? Everything got consequences. It's almost like a mathematical version of the life. We know 1 plus 1, the consequence is 2, right? So everything, ends in a certain direction based on our actions prior to that. And parenting, which is one of the most important, if not the most important things, what we can do in our lives, which is teaching our kids, the future generation, uh, you know, at the end, that what creates the next society, and so on, so on. And if parents forget to do that, well, we can see it, today, that we are actually slipping in our moral standards. The things which used to be normal thing, right? We took
Mm-hmm.
for almost for granted, today are almost non-existent. Like, for example, respect, respect to the other
Right.
people. That's kind of slowly disappearing. We almost taking respect as, well, I'm gonna give respect if that person deserve it. I'm gonna be the judge of that. That plain respect, like respect to the other person, as like a normal thing without any strings attached to it. That kind of disappeared.
Yeah. And do you also think that maybe the bad parents that we have today are also maybe a sign of bad parents from previous generations?
Yeah.
And that's just been kind of this like domino effect where for like the last probably 50, 60 or so
Hmm.
years, we've just had really terrible parents. And then maybe that just kind of has this almost like a snowball effect where it just keeps getting worse and worse because no one is correcting themselves, or at least very, very few people are correcting themselves.
Hmm. Oh yeah, absolutely. My personal belief when that whole thing really started in big time, right? It was after World War II.
Hmm. Baby boomers, right?
Yeah, because World War II did affect the people dramatically, as well as depression. The economic, life, 1930s, that put some effect on the young people and that growing generation, right? From 1920s, 1930s, right? And then, of course, the World War II made additional huge impact on people, right? And those were the future parents of the baby boomers. And
Right.
I think that's why the baby boomers got so really messed up. And some of the things which was in previous societies normal, they kind of threw away, dump it in garbage because
Right.
their parents, the parents who went, the young generation who went through 1930s and then 40s, they just didn't provide it. We always talk about in World War II as the human cost, which was huge. A lot of people died, millions upon millions.
Right.
Then economic cost, right? It was also huge. I would say the
Entire
first,
countries
yeah,
collapsed. Yeah.
first trillions, spent on economy in a small amount of the time. That was right after World War II. I just imagine to rebuild not just to the cities, but to whole countries.
Yeah.
And of course, when you mix it up with the Cold War, which followed after that, right? So you put that whole thing together, like almost like a perfect storm, which actually did happen and affected because baby boomers, their generation was the one which was cut short on providing or receiving the proper parenting. And it could be both ways. Bad parenting can be if you don't give enough parenting, right?
Mm-hmm.
But also can be when you give too much, when you provide too much for the kids. That could be also bad parenting as well. It could go both ways.
Right, you're being too careful with them.
Yeah,
and you're not letting them actually take responsibility for themselves, right?
Yeah, if you're gonna neglect the kids, for example, right? Neglect them not just emotionally, but also materialistically, right? Don't provide food, don't provide stuff above the head. Plus, and of course, with that emotional part, don't teach them proper things. They will struggle in their lives later on. But it can be also the other way around. You just provide too much. You give them just too much stuff, right? And too much attention with every small thing, right? Too much hugging, too much loving, right? Because there is too much. There is definitely too much.
Well, I mean,
it can affect the kids.
We see nowadays with a lot of kids who are like 5, 6, and they already have like a smartphone, right? They already have access to the internet, unfiltered access to the internet, which is even worse because that means they're susceptible to all these pretty bad things that are on the internet. And that's probably a good example of parents trying to give too much to their kids, right? When I was younger, I'm not saying that I was probably the best role model example for what a parent should be doing, but when I was younger, I didn't get my first phone until I was, 12, and that was just a flip phone. I didn't get my first smartphone until I was well into my teenage years. And I think that was smart because had I had gotten it sooner, I would have been glued to my phone every single minute. And I know some people that are like that. When I go to work or when I go to a restaurant, no one even wants to look at each other anymore. Everybody just wants to look at their phones whenever they get even a slice of free time. It used to be before people they would go to have dinner and they would actually just talk. That was how they would pass the time. And now everybody is stuck on their phone. And of course, addiction is going to be something we're going to talk about next week. So I'm going to leave that for later. But you can kind of see, I guess, where the parenting comes in because they were given that access so early on in their life, or it was so pushed on them, right? It was not restricted at all. The parents didn't take any responsibility in saying, hey, you can't just spend all your time on your phone or all your time on the internet. They were just like, yeah, it's okay, it's fine. Now there's almost like no repercussion. Everybody's like, well, I can just be on my phone whenever I want and as long as I want, and it's gonna be fine. So I guess that's kind of one of the big examples I get to see, and people around me that have bad parents.
Yeah. And of course, it's snowballs because eventually those particular kids, they're going to grow up. They will have their own families and they will have to raise their own kids, right? And if they are deficient, in their own life, talking about the parents, if they're struggling with even simple, basic things, in their decision-making process, well, how they can teach, their kids, how to actually, how to live their lives. So it's kind of, either going to stagnate or even going to get worse, which again we can see in present society. And again, go back, to the previous thing. The baby boomers, that was just receiving way too much in a short amount of the time from their parents. It was kind of the thinking like from the parent side, hey, we had very hard lives, we didn't have this and that, so now we're going to try to make it better for our kids, for the baby boomer kids.
They overcorrected.
And they overcorrected it because, and again, when you receive too much, it's actually, again, detrimental. I can illustrate it. You probably noticed usually in the movies, but maybe you had pleasure to meet some super smart, very intelligent and abnormally intelligent kids or people in your life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the very first thing when you see those people, right, when they are grown up, I'm not talking about people who are really abnormally smart. The people who when they were kids they skipped even some grades, right, because they were so smart, right? They skipped certain years in the school because they just were going so much ahead. Well, once they grow up, they are kind of off, right?
Right,
Really,
yeah.
really off, and we always try to think about like what is, I mean, kind of think like, oh, they are the nerds, right? So it's a normal thing, but well, not really. There is something really, it's something like missing, like the basic things they missing, right? And the reason being because they just skipped it. They skipped certain very important years because they were so smart and the focus was on certain particular subject or object in their lives. They focus only on that. Well, yeah, great in mathematics, and physics and so on.
Yes,
Okay, so
let's perfect that.
we're
Yeah.
gonna be focusing on that one and just keep skipping, However, that part of the brain is supposed to be focusing on interactions, communications, personal feelings and feelings towards the other people and so on. That deteriorated or pretty much just froze. And there was no development. And then it's that imbalance in their lives now. They are super
Yeah.
smart, but socially they are super, super awkward.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So, do you think there are any key principles that every parent should follow in order to raise their children correctly? Like, if you could like really pinpoint it down to like a certain set of criteria that makes a good parent.
Well, it's not as simple, but I think it's not as simple. So
Well,
there is no,
I understand that.
there is no simple criteria. I don't think so. It does exist. And at the end, really, even the best parent, there's only so much you can do. We're not the gods, right?
You're right.
So the principles, the Christian principles are right there. That's a solid things. The Christian principles teach the basics, what we should do ourselves and what we should teach our kids, right? And what's a great thing about Christian principles is because they are basic, it can be learned by anyone. It doesn't matter what educational degree you have, what social status, how much money you have or don't, what country you live, and so on. The Christian principles fits pretty much to anyone. Therefore, I mentioned many times before, that's why the faith in God, in Christian God, Jesus Christ, is so important because it gives you all the tools you need. Very simple ones, very basic ones, right? However, they are solid. And then they can branch, to the other, important stuff,
Right.
So number one was always, number one is God. Have a faith in God, right? And I heard it again from so many parents saying like, well, I believe in God, but I don't teach it to my kids because they're going to figure it on their own. Well, they will not. They will not. Some like, you yourself, those parents, right? You learn it from your parents most probably, right? You got to teach it to your parents. Maybe not just by the only words. Most importantly, by your own interactions.
Right.
The kids will do what parents do, right? Kids will usually not do what parents told them to do because they just kind of like, yeah, I don't want to do that, But if they will see the parents doing something right, the kids will repeat it, right? So the kids have to see the parents doing right things. So faith in God is number one. If the kids are going to see it, hey, my parents not just go to the church on Sunday, say a few prayers, go home, and then live their lives, but they actually do the things according to the God, God recommendations. The kids will do that too as well. We have to have their leadership. And the God is the best leader we can have because He's always with us. Doesn't matter where you go. You are in the bedroom, you are in the bathroom, you're at work, you are in your car on vacation. The God is always with you. and he's always, truthful to you as long as you listen to him, right? So the faith in God is the most important thing. The leaderless society or leaderless life always ends up wrong way. We need every leader, right? Each of us, like we have at work, right? There is always a boss, right? In a school, there is somebody in charge of the school itself, university. Even in a country, you got a president, right? Each state have a governor, right? Each city has a mayor. We take leadership for, like a normal thing. But however, when it comes to our life, our personal life, we kind of discard it. We don't need any leader. Well, that's kind of doesn't make any sense to me. Like, we need leader for everything, but suddenly for the most important thing, which is our very life, we don't need leader anymore. I'm sorry, that's stupid, right?
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, the parents gotta teach something. The most important thing is the having the faith in God and follow God's Jesus Christ's teachings.
Right.
That's number one. If they can give nothing else, if they give this one thing, that would be like 90%. Because through the faith in God, kids will actually find the other stuff what they need.
How do you keep kids in the faith? Because I know there's a lot of Catholic families, right? They raise kids, and their kids don't stay in the faith. They end up becoming, I guess, rebellious, you could say. Oh, it's not cool to be Catholic. My friends aren't Catholic, and they leave the church, or they just don't believe it, or something like that, right? I've met so many people over
But
my
why
age.
the kids are rebellious? What do you think?
Bad parenting.
Well, no, but why the kids are rebel?
Because of others? I mean,
Well, usually they're rebel because they think that whatever parents they told them, right, doesn't work, right?
right.
Their thing is usually like, hey, dad, mom, all right,
You don't know.
you
I'm
tell me this
smarter
and
than
that, but when I'm in school with my peers, living my life actually outside of the family, it actually doesn't work. It doesn't apply. It's super hard. It's so tough. It's almost like a fighting against the current. So, what do you think that is the way to remedy that stuff?
I don't know. I mean, the thing is I'm of the belief that most of the parents don't have actually that different of a experience. I mean, we mentioned it the other day about like how bullying has always been a thing. That's not like, oh, something new that they've allowed in schools, and a lot of these other things. It's like, well, parents have, I'd assume, even the bad ones, have some level of wisdom that they can give to their kids. They've been in some of those situations. I mean,
Okay, but let's do the segue to something different. So, what do you think how the parents can remedy, that world perception of their kids who believes that whatever they learn from the parents doesn't apply in their lives because it's just too hard to actually put it actually in a work. The faith, let's say for example, to be courteous, be respectful, be loving, be honest, and so on, right? If they see, it's too hard. Oh, that is too hard. I cannot live like this. My peers going to be laughing at me. They're going to be bullying at me because I'm doing these things which they think is stupid. Well, how the parents can remedy that?
to be supportive. I mean,
Well, how about this? How about this? Hey, son, look at my life. I'm living that life. I'm not just telling you. I'm living my life. And guess what? I'm using now Joe Biden's words. Guess what? It is hard. It is hard for me too. Life is supposed to be hard. It's supposed to be hard. Jesus Christ said, himself, if I had a hard life and I was persecuted, what about you, my followers? Do you think that you're going to have an easier life than me?
no.
How can, the master going to have a hard life, but people working for the master going to have now easier life? It doesn't work like this, right?
Right.
So you're supposed to have the hard life. It's going to be hard. It's going to be super, super hard. But the few things going to happen, that hard life has actually a reward, the after the death in heaven. Because at the end, everybody dies. Life is short. And when you ask older people who are in their 70s and 80s, they will tell you themselves, oh, their life was so short. Why so short? Because this is just a small portion of your entire existence. The life after the death, that has that length without the end, with all the depth and all the understanding and so on. Life here on the earth, earthly life, is just a small, tiny, little fraction of the fraction of the fraction of it. Okay? All right? Second, yes, here, since we are here on the earth right now, it is hard. But each obstacle you overcome, right? Which each obstacle you resist and you overcome it, you become stronger and more resistant, more tougher actually to deal with the other obstacles which they come to your life. And vice versa, if you don't do it, if you just cave in, like, oh, okay, this is too hard, I'm not going to do that. You're going to keep caving one thing after another, right? And at the end, you just pretty much going to rely on your feelings. Well, I don't feel right now I'm going to do this thing because this is too hard. And again, and again, and again, right? Mm-hmm. That's why people become so, really, weak personally, inside. They just cannot, face anything nowadays. Like, look at right now, unfortunately, we got to say that, look at, our politics, right? What our politicians, our representatives, what they are doing.
Right.
And very few people actually are, courageous to say something about it. Which, if you would move it 200 years back,
it was something very courageous about it.
Unimaginable. People are like, what? That politician, is stealing money, living in corruption, and you guys doing nothing? You're just sitting quietly at home, like pretending like nothing is happening? Absolutely unimaginable. No way. Yeah, but 200 years from that time, right? Today, we just like, oh, it's too hard, what should I do? I don't know.
Right.
So you can see how it affects the society as a whole. So yes, life is hard. Okay? It's very hard. Because it's supposed to be. There is no way around it. Okay? Stepping back and giving yourself excuses why not to fight the right things is actually detrimental to our lives. We don't know it at that moment, but it is. So, yes, that was my answer to my kids, Parents, they should that, hey, life is hard. I got it. But it's supposed to be like that. This is not that you are something special and you are suffering because you are doing right things. Every person who is doing right things will suffer in a certain point of their life and will fight against the oppression, will fight against the current, will fight against these things. But it is rewarding. Primary after the death, one day with a God. But even here on the earth, it will make you stronger, more resilient, and you will be able to actually fight the other challenges later on in your life more easier. And the only way parents can do that to show it with their own lives, not just in words like, hey, yeah, I got it, give me a hug. No. Parents got to show it with their own lives, that they actually themselves, they're fighting, If I see my parent, sitting on the sofa all day long and just drinking beer and watching football, if I see my mom, gaining 300 pounds, right? Doesn't want to do anything around the house. The house is dirty, and, kitchen is not clean, just doing nothing. None of them is doing anything, right? But they're telling me like, hey, but you got to believe in God. Well, mom and dad, I'm sorry. You look like a bumps. You're doing nothing with your lives. What do you got to tell me? Then, of course, I'm going to rebel against that, right?
Right.
Parents have to represent what actually they're asking from their kids.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was definitely quite a lot of stuff, and there's definitely more we could talk about, but we have to wrap it up for this week. So in the next episode, we will talk about addiction, where we see its effects on society and how that actually affects individuals. If you have any questions, feel free to send them to us. We may answer them in a future episode. We'd appreciate if you could follow us on all social media. And until next week, thanks for listening. Take care and God bless.
Godspeed.